Welcome in. Excited to bring some fresh content out on PNW Hockey Talk here, starting the Thanksgiving week. Pleased to be joined now by Andy Kemper, who, as many Winterhawks fans, are very familiar with him. He's been around the team for a long time, team historian, knows all the things, keeps me sane, keeps everything kind of running with the stats and all that stuff. So anything you see around the team, you imagine a lot of that has come from Andy. So Andy, I appreciate you joining me here this evening. How have you been?
Been good, thanks. It's great to talk to you again. I know that you know it's hard to believe we're already 22 games into the season. It seems like it just started, but no, everything's been great. Really enjoyed watching this young team start the year, and it's been a bit of a different season. We'll talk about that more, but it's definitely been a bit of a different feel coming to the rink as what it's been the last few years. But I'm having a lot of fun with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think that kind of gets us into kind of why we're doing this. And so kind of the focus, I think for the last couple of years with the team has really been focused around wins and deep playoff runs as kind of the roster and kind of the age range of players has kind of been on the older side. Well, now as kind of Portland looks to reload, they don't necessarily like to use the word rebuild in Portland. There's a little bit kind of a different feel around this year's team. And so just kind of our objective and our goal here is to kind of maybe shed some light on some things that fans may not have maybe seen as much or that you may not be as aware of that might be going on and why this is an exciting time to be a Winterhawks fan. And also why junior hockey maybe isn't like professional hockey, where you have the same core of players over years, dynasties, things like that. So
Yeah.
before I kind of jump into that with Andy, we'll just kind of get a reset for everybody on kind of where the team is 22 games in. So before the games tonight that we're recording here on Sunday, I believe Everett came back on Kelowna, but ultimately, kind of where the Winterhawks are is where we're staying for this content piece. Is they're currently sixth in the Western Conference, fourth in the U.S. Division with 26 points, a record of 12-8-2. Captain Kyle Chzowski currently leads the team with 15 goals and 18 assists for 33 points. If you're looking this up before the league has had a chance to make the stat corrections that Andy and Nick submitted to the league, the empty net goal that Portland scored that was originally credited to Kyle Chzowski is going to be changed to Ryder Thompson. Jordan Duguay is the leading rookie scorer on the team with 6 goals and 6 assists for 12 points. And the specialty teams, I think, is maybe one area that we'll probably touch on a little bit.
Yeah.
But the power play sits second in the Western Hockey League behind Prince Albert at 28%. They have 26 goals on 93 opportunities. The penalty kill is at 81.8%, and they lead the league with 7 shorthanded goals. A little bit of that was helped by 2 empty net goals on Saturday against Wenatchee, with them being the empty net goal. But if you take those away, they'd be tied for third. So overall, that's just kind of where the team sits 22 games in. Andy, I'll just kind of throw it over to you, just kind of your overall maybe thoughts and kind of let you take it where you will. What is your overall impressions 22 games in?
Well, I'm actually pretty happy with the 12-8-2 record, honestly, after 22 games. You knew coming in there was going to be a very young roster. In fact, if you look at, statistically, um, the fewest man games played by a long shot in the Western Hockey League. I think the next closest team is just 300 games ahead of them. So 1,500 and some odd games is what total is for the entire roster. Surprisingly, Kelowna is the next one to them at just over 1,800, and then the highest one's 1,000 more games, and that's Lethbridge. So you knew it was going to be a young roster. You didn't know how to expect, and obviously they come out of the gate, 6-1 after 7 games, and you're kind of going, "What the heck just happened?"
Yep.
Especially with 3 wins over Prince George in those 7 games, and PG is a team that everybody thinks is going to be a contender in the West, and a team that's going to be battling Everett most likely, and well, Train Cities now has also stepped into that mix for being Western Conference champion, and you're feeling pretty good about yourselves, and then roller coaster starts to go down.
Yep.
Wind up losing a few games. Confidence maybe wanes a little bit with the young roster. You're giving up more goals than you should be giving up. Not scoring as many goals you should, especially on home ice. And you lose 8 in a row, right? And so it's okay, back to reality. And now, ever since then, we're back in the same spot. We've won 6 out of 7. Team's playing well again. They're starting to score goals again. They've got 20 goals in their last 3 games, and everything looks rosy. But this is a very going to be a kind of one of those seasons, I think, where we're going to have those up and downs. I mean, it's going to be a very tough week coming up with 4 games and 5 nights against Kelowna and Spokane. So it's been in ways very promising, but in ways there's things that also you can see that the development needs to just get another step further on. You got to consider too, this is a brand new coaching staff, pretty much.
Yep.
I mean, Kyle Gustafson has obviously been there behind the bench as an assistant to Mike Johnston for all these years, but now taking over the reins as head coach and bringing in two relatively inexperienced assistant coaches as far as bench experience goes, and Mike Finelli and Sven Berchi. So they're kind of growing together and figuring out how to run the team from the bench. And I've been really happy with what I've seen. I think I talked to Sven Berchi a bit before the season started, and you could tell that he was learning really how to be on the bench and manage it in that regard. But obviously, he's been a major impact on the power play. As he's mentioned, is one of the top in the Western Hockey League, and really starting to see some of that Berchi magic that he had on the ice start to come through in some of these guys playing on the ice.
Yeah, and I think, kind of along those lines is what's different for me about this team is they've tried to basically play the same way, regardless of whether they're getting blown out in Kelowna or they're,
Yeah,
winning games against Lethbridge, right? Like, and teams that, or Prince George, right? They're just kind of these higher end teams, but they're still playing the same way. And I think last year and the year prior, we maybe saw a little bit of the Hawks maybe being a little bit tentative at times, but then they could also turn on the gas. They would maybe kind of let up a little bit. Where this year's team to me feels like, okay, this is the style of game we want to play, and we're going to play it whether we're up by 4 goals or we're down by 4 goals. And we just want to continue to like build the fundamentals and continue to kind of really trying to drive home the systems because I think it was 12 or 13 rookies that were on this year's
yeah,
team coming in from that was replaced from last year. So I think, when you see that, it's what also kind of lends to some of these comebacks that they've had because they're continuing to play the same way. I've really liked how Kyle Gustafson has managed his bench. I feel like he's done a really good job of kind of giving lines an opportunity to kind of gel with one another, but then also knowing when to shorten the bench, also knowing when to extend the bench a little bit. And I think that's something that I've really enjoyed watching. My colleague Kurt Pose and I, we're especially watching that this past weekend, just seeing how Kyle, given the scores in some of these games where he was utilizing guys
right.
and giving guys opportunities that they may not have had before or that they weren't experiencing earlier in the season. So, there's going to be highs and lows, and I think that's the point. I think I really want to drive home with fans right now because I hear people, I see the comments, I'm reading your DMs that are coming in, and I understand it's frustrating. I understand that you don't want to see some of these lapses on the defensive zone coverage or whether you feel a goal was soft or hey, why didn't they hit the net here or whatever it might be. There's going to be ups and
Right.
downs with this, and so and part of what's exciting is why some of those players that were your favorites, the Gabe Clausens, James Stefan, Jack O'Brien, they were 16-year-olds. And the reason why they were your favorites was because you got to watch them grow and develop. James
Yeah,
Stefan was not what he was. He does not sign an ELC after a 16-year-old year.
right.
Where he finished as a 20-year-old and where he was as a 19-year-old is very different. And part of why that's exciting is because fans got to literally watch these guys grow up. So enjoy this process, enjoy this journey, and appreciate the level of commitment that these players and the coaching staff and Mike Johnson, who's now moved into kind of just the general manager seat and focusing on development, they've got a plan for these guys. And so kind of ride that wave. Understand that the coaches aren't going to bench him if they make a mistake. Kyle Gustafson's talked a lot about it. We'll probably play an audio clip for you here at some point of he doesn't want the players to make mistakes, but if they do, he's not going to bench them, right? Like
Right.
this isn't okay. We're trying to, really make a deep run. They want to obviously go as far as they can, but where last year was more about like, all right, if you're going to make mistakes, there's other guys who can step up and fill your role. Where here it's like,
Right.
you made a mistake. Okay. What did you see? Walk us through it. And there's a couple of examples that I'm sure we'll get into throughout the course of our conversation, but there's a lot to like so far.
Absolutely. And I think that's a huge thing. I think that's one thing that I know from Mike Johnson's perspective from working with him so many years that I have that have been around the team. He never really focuses on the mistakes, right? He uses them for teaching moments and video moments and those things. But for him, it's all part of the learning process. And, you can't always succeed. You're going to have shifts where you don't play well and make a bad pass, whatever it happens to be, or goalie lets in a goal that they know they should have stopped. But what do they gain from it? What do they learn from it? And how does the coach react to it? You know, I think we've all been in positions in our lives where we've had, in our work environments of managers who were good managers and managers who would just take every mistake and blow it out of proportion and make it, much harder to go about your job. Right. So that's the whole thing is, this is a young team and you have to be patient. And you just mentioned it. And that's the fun thing, I think, for development wise, to see where this team is in 2 years. Right. I mean, we're already starting to see progress. And can that continue and how will it grow? And how does the team augment it with, who knows who'll be coming in the door maybe next year with all the NCAA things that are happening that could impact this roster pretty big over the next couple of years. That remains to be determined. So it's going to be a fun process. We haven't gone through a 3 or 4 year build process like this recently because it's just been, steady 40 win seasons plus for the last, 7 years. And it's not to say that 40 wins is not something that could happen this year, but I think if the team won 40 this year, it would be, well above anybody's expectations coming into the season.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And even the past couple of years, one of the things Johnson has stressed is he doesn't really like to make too many snap judgments until 20
Right.
games in. That was 2 games ago. For import players, he says I don't want to judge them till after Christmas break, right? Like so as I know, Stebbitek was probably not pleased with some of the goals that he gave up during that sequence of when they were kind of in that 8-game losing streak. But you got to remember that this is a 17-year-old kid who's come over to North America for the first time. 5 months ago, he had never been to North America, right?
Right.
So where were you at 17? And what were you doing at 17? I know I wasn't. I wasn't across the pond living
No.
with a different family playing a sport. Like that was not me, right? And so now, granted,
Yeah.
these are high functioning athletes and guys who've got pro aspirations, but again, you have to remember that, and I hope fans understand that as much as this is you want to win and this is competitive, this isn't pro hockey. These are guys
Yeah.
who are going to school every day, right? In the case of Stebbitek and these rookies, these 16-year-olds, they're going to Sunset High School, and then they come and practice, then they got a game, and then they go back and they do it all again tomorrow, right?
Right.
Like there's pressure on these kids, right?
Yeah.
So that's just kind of another point I'd want to drive home with this. So
Yeah. And I think it's also, just something to think about is something that I, never really thought about until I got into broadcasting and I started to spend some time around the locker room and post game conversations like with Mike Williamson when he was coaching and his philosophy and something that he had to learn as a coach that he told me was important for him is to realize that it's easier to be negative about the team you see every day because you see them every day. And so you see more of the things that are, mistakes and you see things, but focus on that and focus on what they're doing right. Whereas teams, you come in, you see them once, every other week, or, sometimes with Eastern Conference teams, you see them once a season.
yep.
You notice the positives more than the negatives when you see those teams, just because that's what stands out more. But over time, the things you see more often, you tend to see trends or things that you consider a trend. So it's much easier to be more negative about the team you see every day than it is about the team you're seeing every other week. And I think fans fall into that sometimes too. And it's not, I've been there. I'm that way too. I mean, I've been plenty frustrated this year sitting in the Coliseum and team is struggling to score goals or having, a game where they're having trouble getting out of their zone with regularity. And it's easy to get frustrated. But at the end of the day, you just, it's a game, you have fun and you watch it and you hope these guys grow into what you want them to be.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to pause here and we're going to play a clip from Kyle Gustafson where he talks a little bit about kind of what we just mentioned about kind of the young players and things like that.
When you talk about a 16-year-old kid or you talk about our high school players, that is a big challenge. And we try to do everything we can to educate them and warn them that there's going to be days where you're in the grind. You went to high school, and now you're asking to perform in front of 5,000 people, whatever it might be,
Yeah.
and then have to do it again the next night. So that's something that we've seen in the past.
Yep.
The back-to-back games is something that we've addressed with. At that point, it becomes more off ice than it becomes on ice.
Sure.
How you take care of your body after a game, how you get the proper nutrition in them, how you get ready for the next game mentally.
Yeah.
So those are all part of it, of being a high school player. And we're going to have to just kind of chip away as we go. Is it a problem? No, it's not a problem. It's just a natural progression.
All right. So thank you to Kyle for kind of explaining a little bit more of what the players are going through. So kind of as we kind of continue our conversation, we're going to kind of dive into a couple of different positional groups, and we're going to start with a pair of forwards that each of us like, and maybe why, and kind of what has stood out to us. Kind of, for the purpose of this conversation, we're not going to be focusing on some of the maybe the top line guys, the returners. We want to focus kind of on the development and what we've seen from some of the younger guys. So there'll be plenty of time to talk about how great of a season Kyle Chizowski's having, what Zakreski's been able to do, but Azoni's 2 goals that he had, his shot that we've seen. We'll get into that throughout the season. So kind of for the purpose of this conversation, we're going to talk about maybe some players who are either elevated up in the lineup from where they were last year, or rookies this year. So Andy, maybe I'll throw it over to you to start. Who amongst the forwards has stood out for you?
Well, I'm gonna start with a guy who is a 19-year-old, but came to the Winterhawks last year. He was kind of I wouldn't say a throw-in, but somebody the Winterhawks acquired as part of the Josh Davies deal with Swift Current, Ryan McCleary, and a number of draft picks going to Swift Current and Tyson Yaremko. Yaremko last year came in, and during training camp, there was buzz about will he make the roster or won't he? Because there was a question about if the Winterhawks kept him on the roster, they'd have to give up a conditional pick or two to back to Swift Current. But Yaremko wound up making the roster last year as an 18-year-old. Didn't get a ton of playing time, especially in the first half of the year. But as the season progressed, he kind of grew more, and you could tell right away that he was a locker room guy. He was a guy that really was well liked within the room, and really was a guy that the players respected, and he showed effort on the ice, and he was not afraid to get involved and drop the gloves and do things that he needed to do to be a regular part of the team. And playoffs, I really thought he stepped his game up. He scored some big goals in the postseason for the Hawks last year. And so it's interesting to see what he would do coming in as a 19-year-old and being a more veteran guy and leader. And so far, so good. I mean, in the 22 games, he's got 8 goals, 8 assists, 16 points. Um, I think if anybody would have said that he was tied for the team lead in power play goals at this point in the season, you would probably be very surprised, but he is.
Yep.
He has 5 power play goals with Kyle Chizowski and also Josh Critzer having 5. Diego Battazzoni has 4. And a guy that doesn't see regular power play time, and I think you have the statistic number for his minutes in power play is around just over 2 minutes a game, is what he's seeing power play time over the first 22 games of the season, but he's making the most of it. And he's doing it around the net. I mean, most of the goals he scores in power play are rebounds or deflections or tip in, and he just goes to the dirty spot of the ice and stays there, and the puck eventually finds him, and he's got pretty good hands in front to be able to get those home. And, he's been a kind of a clutch guy, too. I mean, you look at the 2 overtime winners this year, both primary assists on those are from Tyson Yaremko, setting up Diego Battazzoni and Prince George early in the year, and then, of course, Ryder Thompson's big goal in Vancouver last weekend. So he's a guy for me that has really kind of grown into that role. He had decent offensive numbers, a step below the Western League. And I thought that, I really wanted to see what he would do as a 19-year-old and consistently getting mostly top 6 minutes throughout this season. And he's also getting a defensive responsibility too. On the line with Hudson Darby and Carysn Dyck recently have been the lines that go out against top lines a lot of nights. And so he's doing well defensively. He also leads the team in plus minus at a +4 right now. So I think he's been a big part of what the team has been successful at this year.
Yeah, and I remember talking with Mike Coughlin, who was with the organization for a long time before taking a job with the Calgary Flames as a scout there. I remember talking to him, and one of the things he mentioned is like, give Tyson a couple months and he's going to figure it out, but you're
Yeah.
really going to like him as a 19-year-old because there's some skill there. And I think
Yeah.
we saw it a little bit last year when Davies was out towards the end of the year, that Johnson wasn't afraid to put him up on the line with Stefan and Clausen.
Right.
And you kind of highlighted it. The fact that he has 5 power play goals, I think is a testament to what Mike Coughlin and the rest of the scouting staff saw in him, and that there is this capability, especially once kind of some of those other guys had left the organization and the spots opened up. So yeah, I think there's a lot to like with Yaremko. I thought he might have been an outside candidate to get a letter this year along
Yep.
with Hudson Darby. So, but it's just it's fun to watch these guys who you don't know, and then all of a sudden they kind of climb into this higher role. And I think Yaremko has been one of those guys who's really kind of capitalized on the opportunity that he's been given.
Yeah, and I can see him as a 20-year-old next year being, a top forward. Obviously we're seeing Kyle Jazowski's numbers really grow this year as an overage, and he might be on that same progression path heading into an overage season potentially with the Hawks next year.
Yep. So I think I'll go next on a guy that I've really enjoyed watching, and for me that was Kyle McDonough. I think this, you know, the timing of that we're doing this is obviously works out well with him having his first career 4-point night on Saturday against Wenatchee, all there in the third period. But he's obviously playing an increased role. Last year as a 16-year-old, he was averaging just over about 7.5 minutes a game, and he's up by about 9 minutes. He's around 16 minutes now, and last year he didn't see a lot of special teams time, excuse me. A lot of that is because of the players that were in front of him. In fact, he only
Yeah.
played about 10.5 minutes of power play time all year and about 2.5 minutes on the penalty kill. He's over 33 minutes already on the power play this year, and he's fit in well on that second unit. I think he gives some poise and some patience to that group. In talking with him yesterday or on Saturday after the Wenatchee game, he was even kind of mentioning that, it's weird to be a veteran at 17, but when there's not that many guys that have come back, he's really had to kind of step into that leadership role. And, when talking with Troy Tendek, who was one of the kind of the key scouts in identifying McDonough, there's he's been a captain and he is a kind of captain material. And I think the Winterhawks recognize that. And last year he was living with Gabe Clausen and he spent time living with Marcus Newen as well. And I think those are two guys that you can really learn from if you're McDonough on kind of what it means to be a leader, what it means to have an increased role on the team. And he's been, in my opinion, he's been just absolutely lights out on the penalty kill. I think last year he was a little bit timid coming in, both as a 16-year-old, but he had shoulder surgery. That's easy for me
Right.
to say. And I think as he's gotten healthy, we've seen him start to go to some of those dirty areas. And on Friday night against Lethbridge, it was his face that took the 5-minute cross check that basically kind of helped change the outcome of that game. And he's not afraid to kind of get into those areas and to kind of go off of what you were saying with him playing on a line, as I've kind of called it the futures line that was actually the present on Saturday, playing with Brown and Duguay. It's allowed them for Portland to have kind of that top line of Diego, Chiz, and Zakreski, and then kind of have that veteran shutdown line in Carysn Dyck, Yaremko, and Hudson Darby. So I think McDonough is kind of gives them some positional flexibility. I know he really
Yeah.
was playing center. He's been on the wing now a little bit. So there's a lot of versatility in a player like McDonough, and I think he can do a lot, and it'll really elevate the team. And guys like Brown and Duguay, as they're kind of the future of this team, if they kind of build that chemistry now, similar back to several years ago when we saw Cross Hannes and Seth Jarvis playing a line together as 16-year-olds, and they had a 17-year-old up there with them and Jane Duro.
Yeah.
So I think there's some opportunities there, and some similarities.
I agree. And I think last year, I mean, obviously he came into training camp and had a really good training camp before a 16-year-old season. It had a strong preseason. Then wound up getting hurt in the last preseason game, or one of the last preseason games in Spokane, in a collision with Jared McIsaac of Chiefs that led to the shoulder injury. Um, and I think when he came back from that, he was tentative. You know, I think that's a pretty common thing for younger players to, until they, take a hit or until they get into that kind of physical game again, is like, is my shoulder going to hold up or whatever it happens to be.
Yep.
And it affected him, I think, you know, didn't score his first goal, I think, until after the Christmas break last year. And but then he offense started to come and you could see the confidence growing again. And he came in this year and ready to go. And it's he's going to be a guy that's going to be a good scorer for this team. But I think, as you mentioned, his leadership is just as important. And um, obviously, his line right now is really, really rolling. And it's fun to watch those young guys play so well together. And you think, okay, what's that going to be when McDonough's 19 and these guys are 18
Yep.
in 2 years, right? So
Absolutely.
it's just a lot of fun to watch.
Absolutely. Who's the next guy you had marked on your list?
Well, so the next guy I had down was Carysn Dyck.
Yep. Great.
He's kind of an under the radar guy in a lot of ways. Does just about everything to what he's supposed to do and does it well. I think we saw last night he's got a sneaky good wrist shot.
Yeah.
I noticed that actually when he was here for his first training camp, and I was actually talking to Mike Coughlin about it, and I said he's got a sneaky little shot. And he says that's one of the things we liked about him is that he's never going to be a guy who's going to be a 30 or 40 goal scorer, but he can score some goals
Yep.
and be a guy that can contribute offensively. But I think his biggest impact is in energy and work ethic and playing the defensive style of game. Really good on the back check. We saw that early in some of the early wins this season where he created some opportunities by being first in the back check and breaking up some plays in the defensive zone that led to offensive rushes that they succeeded on. Scored a nice shorthanded goal in Kelowna, in the second game of the year by being in on the forecheck with Kyle Jazowski. And I like his game a lot. I think that he's, obviously not the biggest guy in the world, but he's, plays hard on the boards, wins battles. Um, one thing I like about Josh Critzer's game a couple years ago is that he was a pest, and he would go in and chase the puck in behind the net and win battles, just forecheck like crazy and drive other teams nuts. I think Carysn Dyck has some of the similar qualities. He's an 18-year-old first-year player. I think he's got 9 points now after the scoring corrections that will happen from this weekend's games. But we're starting to see a little offense come through now, and I really like what he's been able to do on the checking line, for lack of a better term, with Darby and Yaremko. So I really like his game. I think he could be a similar player to like a Taylor Lear was for the championship team for the Winterhawks. Defense first, but can contribute offensively when asked to. Lear's he wound up being a second line winger. We'll see if that grows into that. But I like his game a lot.
I do too. And I think for me, the word that I would use to describe, Carson is consistent. You know what you're going to get
Yeah,
every shift, right? You may not get these flashy plays, and you may get, that great snipe that he had off the faceoff win by David Hoy, right? And
right.
so you're going to get moments like that, but you also know, like kind of you mentioned, he's just going to go in on the forecheck. And I think I've lost track at six, I think so far, where I've marked down that he's beaten out icing calls.
Right.
And that makes a difference, right? Like
Yep.
especially if you've got guys that are, especially the defensemen, where we're really starting to see some heavy minutes from some guys that if you can beat out those calls, that makes a big difference. Those are things that aren't
Yep.
going to show up on the score sheet. Those aren't going to be things that fans are maybe going to recognize that a player brings to the game. And for Carson, I think that's something he takes pride in. I think he takes
Yep.
pride in his work ethic and that he wants to be a leader, even though he's a first year player. And I think he's setting habits for other players, at least during the games. I can't speak for what goes on during practices and in the locker room, but at
Yep.
least from kind of what he's been able to do on the ice, he's been a great leader. So
Yep.
a lot to like there with Carson. So I'll move us now into kind of the last guy for me, at least from the forward perspective. I'm going to stay kind of with the same line and go with 16-year-old forward Reed Brown. Uh, for fans who may not remember, he was actually the player that the Winterhawks acquired in the trade with the Brandon Wheat Kings for Marcus Newen. That was a 1-for-1 trade. I know Portland was really excited to be able to get Reed Brown in that deal. Marcus Newen had a lot of trade value. There were a lot of teams that were calling on him. And, for Portland to be able to get a 16-year-old player, I think it was a good hockey trade. Brandon is probably happy with what they got for Marcus Newen as they kind of make a little bit of a push this year for Portland. They're really excited to get a player that probably wasn't going to play in Brandon and allows them to kind of keep, Chazowski and then and keep, two really good defensemen back there and also helps them build for the future. But then also it's helping them in the present. Reed Brown was a catalyst in that game on Saturday against Wenatchee, and he's got such good hockey sense. It's so amazing to watch what he's able to do and how the majority of the plays that he is creating starts in his own zone. He is so lethal off the rush. We saw a breakaway. We saw him score on Saturday. He had a great game on Friday as well. I think he's up there with one of the fastest guys on the team. Him and Carson are probably right there. He's not getting a lot of power play time right now. Obviously, that's to be expected as a 16-year-old. 16-year-olds don't get a lot of time. Jordan Duguay is getting some right now, but almost all of about 11 and a half minutes that Brown is getting so far this year has been 5-on-5 or an even strength. And so that's only going to come for him as he really starts to figure this out. And I've really liked the energy that he's brought. And when I was talking to him at the Neely Cup this year, I said, kind of, how would you describe your game a little bit, right? Just kind of one of those softball questions reporters like to ask for the players to
Yeah,
see what they're going to say. And he says he's the offensive guy, and he said, but he's also not afraid to lay a check. And I said, okay, so what helps you determine when you want to lay a check? He goes, well, when I'm mad, look out because I'm going to go hit somebody and I'm going to run them through the boards. And so I was telling that to people, and one of the first couple of games, I saw him, either stumble as he was trying to exit the zone or he lost the puck, and I'm like, look out. And as the guy came in, he knocked him right over, and I was like, that's Reed Brown. And I
right.
think he's going to become a fan favorite really quickly because he's going to score. He's got a great personality. That's starting to come out a little bit,
Yeah.
but he's also going to score, and he's going to play a physical style.
Well, he knocked over Jordan Duguay after scoring against Wenatchee, so
That is true.
that might have
Yeah.
been one of the best checks of the night. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't know if the Hawks have a sponsor for Hit of the Night yet, but if they did, that might have been one of them. But yeah,
it was borderline checking to the head, but the referee let it go. So
yeah, yeah. Well, I'm not going to comment on the officiating on that one. We dodged that one there.
smart move, smart move. Yeah,
Yeah,
no,
yeah,
really impressed with the Reed's game.
yep,
You talked about his speed. That's one thing I noticed early on, even in Neely Cup, is not only does he carry the puck with speed, he does it with confidence.
yep,
I mean, he's not afraid to try to deke somebody, not afraid to try to drive wide and get around a defenseman and then go to the net. 16-year-olds sometimes, they come in, they've probably been dominant players at the previous level. And, sometimes they come in a bit either one of two ways. They could be overly cocky and think they can score on anybody and they
yep,
get that shut down early and then they lose confidence. Or they come in tentative and they don't try the play. They try it as it made them such a good player at a younger age. And they have to grow into it. He's come in and just, played his game. And it doesn't really matter if he's 16, 18, 19, he's going to play his game, and that is drive the puck, go hard, go. He's very much a north-south guy. He's not much of an east-west guy a lot of times. He's just a straight path skater, but he does it with the right mentality, and that's, I'm going to do whatever I can to get the puck to the net.
yep,
Offensively and on the back check, defensively, he's made some really good defensive back checks by using his speed to get back into passing lanes. The one thing I noticed, we talk about him a little bit, but Jordan Duguay also. I mean, Dugay's great hands, stick handled really very well for his age. And I think it's one of the reasons he's been on the power play a bit is he can run that sidewalk
yep.
and manage the puck and make passes. And I think those two together on the power play are going to be very big contributors over the next few years. But I've been looking back statistically, and both Duguay and Brown have been in the lineup every night,
Yep.
all 22 games. So I got to thinking about, in franchise history, how many 16-year-olds have played every game in a season?
Yeah.
And you have to go back to the 72 game season to figure that out. But in franchise history, I'll just have you take a guess. What do you think the number is? Number of 16-year-olds who played every single game in the season?
Oh boy.
I know I'm
All
putting you on the
time.
spot.
All time. Oh boy. I'm gonna guess 9.
It's not bad. It's five.
It's 5. Okay. Wow.
Five players five 16-year-olds who played 72 game seasons. The last one, you have to go all the way back, and I'll look over my notes here, was 95, 96.
Okay.
Andrew Ference
Sure. Well,
was the last
that makes sense. Yeah.
16-year-old to play all 72 games. Prior to that, you got to go back to 83, 84.
Hmm.
So the first 3 or 4 years, they had 4 guys who played. But of those 5, 3 are defensemen. There's only 2 forwards
Hmm.
who played 72 game full seasons. They both played the same year in 80, 81, and that was Ken Yaremko and Peter Dirksen. So it's not often you see 16-year-old come in and play every single night.
Yep.
And I'm not hopefully putting a jinx on these guys.
Right.
But
Right.
I'm just saying that they have an opportunity to do something that not a lot of 16-year-olds have had an opportunity to do in Portland. Because I know that they can keep producing and keep playing the style of game they're playing. That their number is going to be in the lineup every night.
Yep. Absolutely. And it's one of those interesting elements too, where there's more and more of these Hockey Canada and USA
Right.
hockey events too that can sometimes take players in and out of them. And
Right.
I thought Duguay was probably right there, probably for Hockey Canada. And
Right.
sometimes if you're not a first round pick, it's hard to make some of those teams.
Right.
But it's just when you see these players and the consistency that they bring, right?
Yeah.
And I think that speaks to it. And you look at the names that you just mentioned; those are some all-time Winterhawks, right? Like
Right.
those are guys who have had their names named or like team
Yeah.
names, Ely Cups, right? Like those are key guys for the organization that they're really proud of.
Yeah. The other one, guys, I didn't mention was a guy named Rick Davidson, the defenseman.
Yeah,
Known more for being Cam Neely's best friend. You got Cam Neely to go to the training camp with the Winterhawks.
worked
And
out
then
okay.
Gary Nyland in 79-80 wound up being a Toronto Maple Leafs first round selection. So yeah, there's some good names there. But you think back, you go, oh, 16-year-olds like Seth Jarvis had a great 16-year-old year, Cody Glass and Ty Ratty, and
Yep,
none of those guys played full seasons.
yep.
So
Absolutely. So we're going to hear again from Kyle Gustafson. I had a chance to talk to him a little bit about that kind of futures line a couple times over the weekend. So we'll hear from him, and we'll be right back.
It's crazy. Often talk about the 20 game mark and where we are with our lineup. I'm not afraid to play them against 20-year-old guys. Like they're doing a great job right now. They seem to be in sync with one another. There's some learning lessons along the way, but they got valuable ice time tonight against a good team. They're playing with such great confidence right now, and it's really fun to watch. To be honest, you've got young kids, and I even classify McDonough as that, even though he's a veteran player. They're just taking off right now. They're taking off before we know it. The chemistry that they have, they're playing carefree hockey, which I say that loosely, but they're playing not to make. If they make a mistake, we'll live with it. But right now, they're doing stuff with the puck that's really, really special.
Thank you again to Kyle for answering some additional questions about McDonough and Brown and Duguay. So, Andy, I know we've touched a little bit on the forwards now, so we'll kind of pivot a little bit after you highlighted Yaremko and Carysn Dyck as forwards who you've been impressed by. I touched on McDonough and Reed Brown. So as we kind of pivot now to the blue line, who kind of has stood out for you from a development perspective so far, 22 games in?
I kind of, there's a few to choose from that have all played, pretty well in their first full years. But I'm going to go back to Cole Slobodian, who we got to see a little bit of last year in the postseason, late in the postseason after Carter Sutherland's arm injury in PG, who came in and, his first ever Western Hockey game was Game 6 of the Western Conference Final. No pressure. But he showed very well in that, and then in the games against Moose Jaw and the limited ice time he got, I thought he played well. Another 18-year-old first year player. Winterhawks have been actually pretty good about developing players and actually not rushing them into the Western Hockey League. Giving an opportunity to play some, minor hockey, and Slobodian's coming as an 18-year-old, and you obviously have your three veteran D-men and Jugnoff, Thompson, and Southern. And it's been, they were kind of hoping that Alutka would maybe move into that top four. That didn't work out for the Hawks in that case. So they've been kind of rotating some guys into the top four, and I think Slobodian and it's really kind of taken some of that position as being a top four guy. Especially, we're seeing him more and more on the penalty kill. I think he's in the top 2 or 3 defensemen as far as penalty kill time this season. And I think offensively only had 1 assist on the season so far, but I don't think that's really what his game is. I think it's there, and we've seen some. He's been close to getting some scoring opportunities here in the last few games. But for me, I think it's the thing I'm noticing and like about him most is that you don't notice him all that much when he's on the ice, and that to me is the good sign of a defenseman. If you don't notice them, they're usually doing things right.
Yep.
And very solid in his own zone and plays well when he is in the offensive zone. But very much Ryder Thompson-esque for me a little bit. Obviously, different build, different look about his game, but steady Eddie, a guy you can throw out there, every third shift and not have to worry too much about it. And so I think that's been a huge impact on Portland's defense to start the year.
Yeah, I would completely agree. He kind of reminds me of the defenseman version of Carysn Dyck, right? You know what you're getting
Right,
when Slobodian's out there, and with Josh Morey being moved on to Edmonton, I think there was another big gap there for a player like Morey. Morey did
right,
whatever it took to help the team win, and I get
right,
that absolute same vibe from Slobodian. I think if he was asked to play forward, he'd say, "Okay, which side do you want me on?" Right? Like I
right,
think he would just he's the kind of guy of like, I'm going to quietly go about my business. And like you said, if you don't notice him, it's probably a good thing. It means he's having a good night. And when you've got a lot of offensive defensemen like Portland does, we'll touch
right,
on Ruedig here in a second, but you got Ruedig and Southern and Jugnoth who are all want to go, right? Well, you got to have a guy who's willing to stay back. And Slobodian's kind of that guy. And but one of the things that I've noticed about his game, while he may not have the points, he keeps plays alive in the zone. He
right.
may not get the pucks. He may not have a blistering slap shot that we've seen. He may not be able to, see a perfect lane like we've seen, Tyson Jugnoth do or something like that. But in the same way, he almost like blocks shots at the blue line and like just funnels them back in. And I really noticed that on Saturday against Wenatchee. The number of plays he kept alive at the blue line, so that way the cycle game and the ground game could keep going. I think
Right.
is something again that fans may not see. And so I hope fans start looking for things beyond just the goals. Start watching a player say, okay, for this period, I'm not going to just watch the puck. I want to watch this guy or I want to watch this position. And I think you'll really start to see some things that you'll really appreciate. And I think Cole Slobodian is one of those guys that will really reward you for that type of viewing.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you notice him on, coming back in his own zone. What's he doing with the oncoming forward? Is what's his gap? Where is he in relation to that forward? And is he, pushing him to the sideboards and not giving him the middle of the ice, doing simple things. And then in front of that, blocking shots. He almost had he blocked a great shot that wound up still being scored on late against Lethbridge.
Yep.
But when Briard made a great move to get around Stebatek, Slobodian was there to block that initial shot, doing those little things that defensemen need to do to be successful in the Western Hockey League. And I just he's very quiet, very subtle, but he's a guy I noticed for those kind of efforts, night in, night out.
Yeah. And for me, I'm going to go Cade Ruedig, kind of alluded to it. I'm going to
Yeah,
avoid talking about Jugnow, Southern, and Thompson, kind of like you said, even though they've taken on increased roles. Rudig is a guy who I think really wanted to make the team last year. And as you alluded to earlier, Portland doesn't want to rush their players, and
right.
especially defensemen. Southern wasn't rushed, right? He came in last year, or 2 years ago, I guess now.
Years ago.
2 years.
Yeah,
Time
right.
flies, right? But
Yeah,
he
he was very close to 16-year-old, but didn't
yes.
actually make the roster full time until 17.
Yes, exactly. Right. And so I think that's the same path that Rudig's on. Right. And what it did for Southern, I think it did for Rudig, which was you had the ability to go back, play minor hockey, and be the guy, play in all
Yeah,
situations. And he got an opportunity to go do that with the Swift Current Legionnaires. And he actually played alongside Griffin Darby,
right,
Portland's first round pick from 2 years ago. And he was a key guy for them, got a lot of minutes, played in all situations. And now he comes in and he's ready to go. And you can just see this difference in his body language, his confidence, and even his interviews, right? Like I've interviewed him at the past couple of Neely Cups, right? When he first got drafted, when he showed up as a 16, and then this year. And I'm like, I don't even recognize the guy. He's just
right.
the confidence that he's come in with, and he's an offensive guy. He wants to chip in offensively, and there's going to be mistakes defensively. You live with that. Luca Cagnoni was not the best defensive defenseman to start.
No,
But he
it
was
was not.
also then became the first WHL defenseman to score 90 points, right? Like
Yeah,
you're gonna make some of those trades. And Rudig at 17 is already kind of fitting in. He's done a great job. He's about 14 and a half minutes a game, about a minute nine on the power play or so. And he's done that as kind of the second unit. He's probably going to be the third defenseman that's chosen to hop over the boards there. And he's also one of those guys that if depending upon where they're at in the game, Gustafson's not going to be afraid to say, okay, here's a look where we can give him an extra chance on the power play. And I think that's where he's really going to shine. And I've talked with Kyle a lot about, okay, not just him specifically, but if there's turnovers, especially on zone exits, or maybe you get lost in defensive zone coverage as some of these top lines. I think that's been a big theme this year is there's been just
Right.
kind of big, heavy lines and less kind of depth, at least from the teams that we've seen so far. Like it's just, Everett's kind of maybe the one exception, but you've
Right.
got all these other teams. Lethbridge is one of them where they just kind of have this big, huge line. Kelowna, right? Like they're going to have their big lines. And for Rudig, it's okay. If I make a mistake, he knows he's not going right to the bench. And Gustafson wants to see Rudig and see him kind of continue to go, okay, what did you do? Okay, now let's go see it differently. Okay, now next time, are we a little bit better? Did we make the decision a little bit faster? And I've really noticed
Yeah.
that in Rudig, especially over the past 2 or 3 weeks. And he's just kind of he's learning a little bit more. I think he's a little bit more in control of his skating, and that's been for me really fun to watch, kind of how he's done that. And I think getting him to play with different defensive pairings, and I think that's the benefit of having three veteran guys who kind of play the game all a little bit differently. Rudig's been a guy who's kind of played with all three of them.
Yeah.
And he learns from what Jugnoth does. He learns from how Sutherland plays, and he learns from how Thompson plays. All three of those guys have elements of their game that Rudig can really benefit from. And I think he's been a player that is going to be, you talk about 2 years from now, Rudig is going to be a really, really fun player to watch. He's got a lot of those tools now. It's a little raw, but a lot of these guys are. They're a young team. They're learning. And Rudig for me he's really kind of he's making those steps, and you like to see that.
For sure. And I've, noticed with his game that he's again not the biggest defenseman in the league, but he plays physical enough, and is not afraid to get involved with that part of the game. And he's actually been paired with Griffin Darby quite a bit the last few weeks. And I think that says a lot about his game also. I mean, yeah, I kind of left Griffin Darby off my list a little bit because I have very low expectancies of 16-year-old defensemen in the Western
Yes.
Hockey League
Yep.
because that to me is the hardest position to come into play as a 16-year-old, and I think Griffin's handled himself really well.
Yep.
You know, obviously not setting the world on fire with offensive numbers, but I think for him, noticing his game, he's been really focused on the defensive coverage and really focused on playing that game and playing physical and around the net and throwing the body check. He has plenty of offensive ability, and it's going to show before his time is done in the Western Hockey League.
Yep.
But I can, I think of like, I think it was Clay Honus's numbers when he came in.
Yep.
I think he had 6 assists his first year
Yep.
as a 16-year-old, and then we saw what he did towards the end of his career offensively. I'm not saying that Darby's going to put up those kind of offensive numbers, but for me, he's a 200-foot player,
Yep.
and so he was my next choice beyond Slobodian. But as I mentioned, I don't put a lot of weight on a 16-year-old's
Yep.
game, especially defensively. And but I think it says something for Ruedig that pair has been very solid for them over the last few games that they've been together, and just leads to a better future.
It does, and it's the same way that they also. I think it helps that they played together last year, right? They kind of
Right.
know each other's tendencies a little bit more so than if you would take another random 17-year-old defenseman and put him with Darby, right? It's
Right.
Darby
Exactly.
knows what Darby knows where Rudig's going to go, right? Like,
Right.
and I think that also allows Darby to work on his defensive game because he's going to kind of be further back. He's going to be kind of that reliable. I was kind of surprised to see Darby get into a fight, earlier in the year, and I think some of that is you're trying to figure out your way. I get nervous with that. I'm like, man, your hands are too valuable with this, right? Like, I don't, and I
Right.
never really like seeing 16-year-olds fight. I just think they've got so much that they want to do, but you give him credit for trying to influence the team and trying to show guys that he belongs. And so I hope that that's not kind of the path that he moves down towards, because I think he's got more than that. But you also like seeing guys that aren't afraid to stand up for a teammate,
Right.
uh, and I think that goes a long way. We saw what his brother Hudson did on Saturday, completely turned that entire building around, not just the bench,
Right.
not just the players. I mean, that building was pretty quiet. And
It
then
was.
and then Hudson just completely drops the gloves. It was a good fight, good scrap. I think both guys got some punches. They got tired towards the end, and he pops up and he gives this to the fans, and Portland goes down, and it's that futures line that we've been talking about, goes in and scores three straight goals, right? It's just completely changes the game, and so fight can do that, and it can also give confidence to a player of like, I belong here. So I'm curious
Right.
to see kind of how that continues to help Griffin as he moves along.
Yeah, and both, obviously, Griffin and husband's father, Regan Darby, was that kind of player when he played in the Western Hockey League.
Yep.
Good offensively, but also a very tough customer to deal with on the back end. And
Yep.
Griffin might have some of that same characteristics, same family traits heading in for his career also.
Yeah. Yeah, we're not going to touch too much on the goalies, just for the sake of our time here, and want to be respectful
Yeah,
to everybody. So we'll talk about Schlenker and Stebatek, but overall, I think just high level with them, without diving too much into their game. I don't pretend to be a goalie expert. I've learned a lot over my 7 years, especially talking with Andy Moog for those years while he was here, and it's been. I think when you've got two inexperienced goalies who didn't have any Western Hockey League experience coming in, I think you have to be really impressed. Do they have goals they want to get back? Yeah, every goalie does, right? Bobrovsky gives up goals in the Stanley Cup final that he wants back, and he's a $10
yeah,
million goalie, right? And goalies, sometimes their numbers, if especially to those who are shouting in my DMs about their numbers, it is a team sport, it is a team game, and a lot of times you can look at goalie numbers and go, man, he just can't stop the puck. And that's not the case for either of these guys. And they're the ones, it's kind of like kickers in football. If the kick gets blocked, they may have done everything right. They might have
right,
been in a perfect position, but if the lineman over here doesn't do something right and there's a free rusher, right? Like, so I would just say, again, extend some grace to the goaltenders as well. But, are there goals they want back? Yeah. But there's also been some saves that they've made that they probably had no business making as well.
right. I agree totally. And I equate like save percentage to any pitcher's ERA.
Yep.
One pitcher has a bad outing and they give up 8 runs in 3 innings, their ERA is reflected negatively. Same
Yep.
thing with save percentage goals against average. There were a couple games during that 8 game stretch where both of them had tough nights where they gave up, 5 goals on 18 shots or something, and like that.
Yep.
And your numbers are, it's going to take you a while to rebound from that in your statistical numbers.
Yep.
But very pleased with both. I think
Yep.
they both compete really well. They both battle hard in the crease. Um, things that they're going to learn and get better at over time, and rebound control and those kind of things are just
Yep.
things you have to learn when you're a 17 and 18-year-old goaltender,
Yep.
especially your first year in the league.
You have the game in front of you.
I don't remember winning our team that had 2 rookie goaltenders
Wow.
as your goaltender tandem, right? So I've been very happy with both of them, and I also look at the type of games that Winterhawks have been playing. Most nights, with the exception of 2 or 3 games, have been close games.
Yep.
And you look at, especially on home ice where the Winterhawks really struggled to score goals in the first 8 home games. We only scored 17 goals on home ice in the first 8 home games, and still wound up being 3-4-1 during that stretch.
Yep.
Says a lot about the goaltending. And then obviously they broke through with 14 goals in 2 games this year. But heading into the weekend, I like to keep track of weird statistical things, and the Winterhawks had only led for 51 minutes of the first 8 home games.
Oh, wow.
That's 10% if you
Yeah.
want
Yeah.
to, add that number in. And they still wound up being almost 500 during that stretch.
Yep.
So it says a lot about the resilience of the team. They had some late comeback wins and those kind of things. And they won a couple games in shootouts where they'd never led during the game. But, overall in the season, I mean, the Winterhawks only led like 26% of the time combined, and they're above 500.
Exactly.
So the goaltenders are doing what they need to do to keep them in the game.
Yep.
And, team rallies and comes back and wins some games where they struggled offensively early, even better. But, I think a couple games this weekend that turned out to be fairly lopsided victories, a 3 goal and a 4 goal game, did some wonders for this team. And I think that I think both those guys are going to be quality goaltenders for the next couple of years.
Yeah. I saw everything I needed to see with how they played against Prince George, both of them.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, outstanding.
It
Absolutely
was,
outstanding.
and how they played against Everett outside of the first game in Everett, but Everett had that game circled from the moment they were eliminated.
Yeah, there was some retribution on their minds for sure.
Yeah, that was okay. Yep, that's one of those. I don't want to call it a
Yeah.
scheduled loss, but that was one like, okay, yep,
Yeah.
that was Everett's revenge game, and congratulations, you won a game in October, right?
Yeah.
So
You take your lumps and move on to that one.
yep, exactly. You take your lumps in Kelowna, right, and you move on, and they're gonna, Kyle talked a little bit about what to expect. We'll maybe hear from him on kind of previewing Kelowna to kind of wrap things up here. But kind of before we do that, Andy, what are some maybe one or two areas that, between now and Christmas, kind of that next kind of stretch of games, what is something that you're going to be kind of looking into or kind of watching as you're in the VMC or as you're watching things online? What's Andy Kemper going to be looking for?
Well, obviously, I think losing Ryan Moore has had an impact on this team a little bit. He was a guy that was really starting to take over games sometimes. Um, really good offensive numbers and was really a very solid part of the top six. Um, so I just wanted, for me, I'm going to be watching just consistency, especially in the three lines we talked about tonight a little bit. The fourth lines had some moving parts in and out, depending on who was in the lineup and who wasn't. So with Hoy and Hankel and Braden Jockums, who I think that line when they're on the ice have been doing some good things too. Lots of battle energy, you know, not getting rewarded necessarily every game for what they're doing, but they're playing the style of game they need to play when they're on the ice. But I think we're seeing consistency in the three forward lines. The futures line you talked about, top line, which is Owski, Zakreski, and Belzoni, who we spent very little time talking about tonight.
Yep, exactly.
But they're all having good starts to their season, doing really well. And then Carysn Dyck, Hudson Darby, and Tyson Yaremko line. I think if they can roll those lines consistently and find a way to keep their special team numbers where they're at, I think there's a good opportunity for the Winterhawks to win some games here before Christmas. Some teams are going to be losing some guys to the World Juniors. This might be the first time the Winterhawks aren't going to lose anybody to that event
Yep.
in quite some time. And trying to distance himself, and into that mid tier of the Western Conference. To me, it's just about getting through this next week with the 4 games in 5 nights,
Yep.
and going to December with the right mindset. The other thing that we haven't talked about that we'll probably spend some time talking about at some point is we don't know what's going to happen with the NCAA. I know the Winterhawks have some guys that they're probably talking to that
Yep.
might be an opportunity to move to the Western Hockey League at some point, whether it's this year or next year. Um, and you never know. He might get something that you don't expect.
Yep.
Not that I have any inside information on that because I don't, and I don't want to lead people to believe that something's imminent. But I just think that those are conversations that every team is having now with guys on their protected list about impact for this year and next year. So that to me over the next 6 weeks is something that's going to be interesting to see what happens before the trade deadline.
Yep.
Are any of these guys going to commit to come to the Western Hockey League? And then for Mike Johnston now as the full-time GM, what is his mentality heading into the trade deadline on January 10th?
Yep.
I'm sure he's going to be getting some calls on some of the veteran players.
Yep.
Where are we at? What's his thought process? He's been a very loyal coach and GM to his players, but he's also not a guy who's going to pass up an opportunity to make his team better if he has that opportunity. So that to me is what I'm looking at is, how does the team continue to grow? Do we not have the big, roller coaster, stretch like we've had in the first 22 games where you're up, then you're down, then you're up again? Is it more even keel? And really just watching the development of the players and just watching them grow together as a team, I think is my whole key to the season I'd love to see the playoffs and I'd love to see all that. But for me, it's just about development and watching it and projecting where this team will be in 2 years.
Absolutely. For me, it's like I said multiple times last year, it's enjoy the season, right?
Yeah.
The season goes by way too fast. I can't believe we're 22 games already in, right? Like I
Right.
feel like it was just yesterday. I was at Sherwood covering the Neely Cup. And it feels like a month ago I was, covering games of the WHL final, right? Like it's
Right.
it's amazing how fast this goes. So enjoy this experience. Um, enjoy the process. For me, I'm really watching 5-on-5. I've
Yep.
seen there's a lot of things to like on the special teams. I want to see him take that next step 5-on-5. I want to see him to start generating some. We really saw it on Saturday. I think there were glimpses of it on Friday. I asked Kyle, kind of tongue in cheek a little bit, if that was the best 57 minutes they've played all year.
Right.
Because outside those last couple minutes at the end of the second, early into the third I thought it was great. I thought they probably deserved to win by 4. It happened with 2 empty netters, but I thought the way that they played 5-on-5, I thought it was the first time they've really got their cycle game going, their ground game going. They got, I'm going to use the cliche that I hate hearing from players, but as they got the pucks in deep, they legitimately did that. They
Right.
made the defenseman turn. They were able to beat Hauser, who's one of the best goalies in the Western Conference. Um, and so 5-on-5 is a big thing for me. I am curious to see how the team does with Mike Johnson away, because while they're not sending any players to the World Juniors, Mike Johnson is going to
Yeah.
be resuming his head coaching, or not head coaching, excuse me, his coaching duties, joining some very talented Canadian coaches on Hockey Canada's bench. I met a couple of those guys when I was at Saginaw for the Memorial Cup, and Chris Lazary and the other guys, Slovene, whatever his last name, I can never pronounce it. Drummondville's head coach.
Yeah.
I always was like, I don't know how to. I'm going to mispronounce this, so I'll just say hello. Good to meet you,
I'm
sir.
staying away from it too.
Yeah, I'm like, I don't want to end up saying something I'm going to regret. But
There you go.
so I am curious to see how that does for Mike. I know talking with him, I think he's enjoyed kind of being able to kind of take a step back and really focus on the development. I know how passionate he is about developing his players and watching them grow and making his team better. I
Yeah.
do know that there's a lot of conversations going on. I don't have any inside information like you, but I do know that not only is Portland looking at their own list, they're looking at other teams' lists, like you saw with Reed Brown. They've not been afraid to acquire rights to other American players, right? Going back to Bobby Brink, several years ago, right?
Right.
Colin Frank that they got in one of the deals as well. So there may even be players that aren't even on that fans may even look at the protected list that's on winterhawks.com, and they may not even be some of those guys that
Right.
Portland could potentially bring in. So we just don't know. It is going to be something that's really exciting. I think it's really good for player development. I think it's really good for players' choice. I think it's really awesome that these players don't have, and parents and advisors and agents don't have to make decisions so early. I think it's really going to benefit Portland in the long run to be able to have this. Um, I'll be having a piece on PNW Hockey Talk from Ryder Thompson, talking a little bit about what it means from a player perspective. So that should hopefully be
Yeah.
coming in these next couple of weeks. But overall, I think, as we kind of wrap up here, I think there's a lot to like. I think this is an exciting time. It's a different form of excitement as opposed to getting ready to make a deep playoff run. They're not going to acquire the Nate Danielson. I can tell people right now, Braden Yager is not coming to Portland. So stop asking. He's not coming to Portland. Stop asking about Braden
No.
Yager, please. I beg of you. I will turn in my credentials if Braden Yager is a Portland Winterhawk, because I can say with that much confidence. So please stop asking me about Braden Yager coming to Portland. You can ask me if I have where he might else be going. That's fine. He's not coming to
Right.
Portland, so stop asking, please.
I would step away myself if that happened.
Yes, that's wow, but no, it's
Right.
not happening. Stop. So there's other anyway. We're not giving that any more attention than it deserves here. So anyway, Andy, I really appreciate you joining here,
Yeah.
talking through. It's always a pleasure to talk hockey. I know we could go for a lot longer as well, but
Yep.
good talking hockey, and we'll do this again if we've got time. Thanks for fans for tuning in. Andy, how can they follow or interact with you? I believe you got Twitter or social or X or whatever it's called nowadays.
Yeah, so I'm on exit at Andy Kemper. I'm actually got a Blue Sky account too now.
Okay.
It's under Andy Kemper also, which I just started. I haven't really done much on that platform as of yet. So X is my main way of contact. If you want to follow me, I usually throw out some really obscure, weird statistical things. But I also want to make sure fans are informed of things like scoring changes and
Yep.
post game that are of interest to fans. So yeah, follow me there. And then we'll see how Blue Sky goes. I don't know. I haven't really started using that platform yet, but
Sure.
I do have an account on there now.
Awesome. Wonderful. Yeah. Again, keep up with our content. This will be on pnwhockeytalk.com. You can follow me on Twitter, X, whatever it's called, JJ Critzer.
Yep.
Happy to answer any questions that you guys have. And again, enjoy the process. Enjoy this time. Look forward to seeing you around the rink. Thanks, everybody.